U.S. Ambassador to Lebanon, Dorothy Shea, thank you for joining us today.
Thank you, Ginwa. It's a pleasure for me to be here with you.
Same here. Some consider that Lebanese people are suffering from the consequences of the American stance with respect to Hezbollah.
No, actually, the Lebanese people are suffering from the consequences of decades of corruption, irresponsible spending, and financial mismanagement by successive governments that promised reforms but failed to deliver. The United States is actually Lebanon's largest donor. Last year alone, we contributed $750 million in humanitarian, development, and security assistance. It is true that we have grave concerns about the role of Hezbollah, a designated terrorist organization which has held ministerial positions in this government and in several previous governments. Some call it a state within a state. It has siphoned off billions of dollars that should have gone into government coffers so that the government could provide basic services to its people. And it has obstructed some of the economic reforms that the Lebanese economy so desperately needs.
Okay, so there are fears that the Caesar Act will affect the Lebanese people and that they will pay the price of the restrictions. What's your say on that?
No, the Caesar Act is not directed at the Lebanese people or the Lebanese economy. The Caesar Act targets the Assad regime and its financial enablers. The goal of the law is to deprive the regime of resources so that it cannot continue its devastating war against the civilians of Syria. The sanctions target individuals or entities who conduct significant transactions that benefit the regime. The sanctions do not target average Lebanese people, nor will they affect legitimate economic activity. I've spoken with representatives of the Lebanese government to explain the intent and the scope of the law, and I've made it clear that it is not targeted at the Lebanese people who are trying to put food on their tables.
Does Washington think it's still possible for Lebanese people to avoid economic collapse?
Well, the economy is in crisis, and I think most Lebanese are feeling that. What's important now is that the Lebanese government actually take the steps that they've been talking about to end endemic corruption and to correct the mismanagement that got the economy into this mess. There are the very real reforms that the people have been calling for since October 17th. The people wanted economic opportunity, accountability, and transparency. This is what it's going to take to restore confidence in the Lebanese economy. And the government is in talks with the IMF. They haven't yet begun actual negotiations or committed to a plan of action, and that's what it's going to take. As they do so, we stand ready with others in the international community to help.
Will closer ties to China affect the United States' relationship with Lebanon and the assistance?
Well, look, we understand Lebanon is in desperate need for an infusion of cash. They need investors, but against the backdrop of the current economic crisis and the country's first ever default back in March, investors are not lining up out the door. So some people have talked about Lebanon turning east, as if that's the answer to all of Lebanon's economic woes, as if that's really a solution. Who knows, maybe there will be some Chinese investors. But as the Latin adage goes, caveat emptor, buyer beware. Oftentimes, Chinese investment entails debt traps, loans and opaque business deals, and when the country can't pay them off, well, we've seen what happened in Sri Lanka and Djibouti. So, as Secretary of State Pompeo has stated, the United States strives for trade and investment on fair and reciprocal terms, with reliable partners for mutual benefit. The People's Republic of China, by contrast, has business dealings that tend to be very opaque, transactional, and geared to benefit the Chinese Communist Party. So we want to ensure that if there is investment by China, its activity do not come at the expense of the country's prosperity, stability or fiscal viability, or of course of the long-standing relations with the United States.
Would the United States be able to help the Lebanese people regain the assets that were taken by a ruling political class, which is considered accused of corruption?
Potentially. There are established procedures for the government of Lebanon to request legal assistance through law enforcement channels in the event of criminal financial transfers.
What do you think about October 17 revolution, and how do you react towards the accusations that U.S. stands behind it?
Well, the United States has dismissed those accusations on numerous occasions, and I recall seeing a really funny meme that went viral, and I would have hoped that that would have put those conspiracy theories to rest. But I think we all saw that those October 17th protests were organic. We saw people from across the political spectrum and from political divides coming together to voice their demands from the government to end corruption, to provide basic services. And at that time, the United States made clear we stood behind the right of those protesters to exercise their right of freedom of expression, and we still do. But some of the protests more recently have been very different in form. We've seen violence and sectarianism, and that is, of course, very concerning.
Okay. Will we be seeing any sanctions on Hezbollah allies who belong to different sects or parties?
Well, we don't normally discuss sanctions announcements in advance of designations, but yes, we have noted that counterterrorism sanctions apply not only to Hezbollah, but to those who provide them with material support. There are also sanctions under the Global Magnitsky Act, and those are potentially going to apply to those who are grossly corrupt, and that is without regard to sectarianism or party affiliation.
What is your evaluation of the Diab government, whose Lebanese opponents accuse it of being a puppet for Hezbollah?
Well, the United States is still evaluating the extent to which the Diab government is what it says it is, an independent government of technocrats, not beholden to Hezbollah. But there were concerns about the way the government was formed. And I think Hezbollah was the first to endorse it. So we continue to have very serious reservations in this regard. And we also have not yet seen what we would have hoped for from this government in the way of concrete steps to implement the reforms that the economy so desperately needs.
Lately, Hezbollah cornered Central Bank Governor Riyad Saleh with the appointment of 4 deputies chosen through normal sectarian politics rather than merits. How do you assess this step amid the Lebanese crisis? How will the United States deal with it, and what effects can it leave on Lebanon?
Well, the central bank and other appointments are a matter for the government of Lebanon to decide. I did my best. I tried to convey the importance of having credible and internationally respected experts at the central bank. Making appointments based on politics as usual is not going to help recover Lebanon's failed economic and financial model, nor is it helping to rebuild confidence.
Nasrallah lately appeared threatening his opponents inside Lebanon, the Americans, and their interests.
Yeah, that was very concerning, his threatening language. And we've also noted that the speech was kind of defensive and riddled with classic deflection, blaming everything on the United States when we're Lebanon's largest donor, having given $4.9 billion over the last 2 decades in humanitarian, economic development, and security assistance. And while he accuses us of starving Lebanon, your viewers might be interested to know that just recently the United States announced $13 million in new emergency food aid targeted at the most vulnerable populations in the country. So by its actions and by its threats, Hezbollah is destabilizing the country and jeopardizing Lebanon's economic recovery.